The Battle of Ferozeshah, fought during the First Anglo-Sikh War in 1845, was a battle of egos, madness and traitors. A farcical power struggle between the two most senior British officers. Bayonet charges against cannon. British cavalry and artillery ordered off the field midway through the battle, and Sikh commanders snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. It's almost comical if it were not for the 5,000 men killed or wounded. This is the story of the bloody, bitter and slightly bonkers Battle of Ferozeshah, 1845. I've covered the background as to why the First Anglo-Sikh War broke out in my episode about the Battle of Mudki. Those of you who listened to or watched that episode might recall that Maharaja Ranjit Singh had built up the Sikh Empire centred in the Punjab, and it put him on a collision course with the other expanding power on the subcontinent, the British East India Company. Recognising that a clash was highly likely, he'd built his army, the Khalsa, into a formidable fighting force. Modelled, trained and armed to European standards with an awesome array of cannon, the Sikhs would be the toughest army the British ever faced in India. In late 1845, Sikh forces crossed the Sutlej River into British-controlled territory, and the First Anglo-Sikh War was on. The first battle, fought on the 18th of December at Mudki, had proved inconclusive, with the British winning the field after the Sikh commander, Lal Singh, had deserted his own army. However, the Khalsa was still very much up for the fight. Lal Singh himself had fallen back on the nearby village of Ferozeshah, where he built an impressively strong fortified position, a mile in length and half a mile deep, manned by 100 cannon. If the Khalsa was still up for the fight, so was the British commander, General Sir Hugh Gough. A fighting general, 66-year-old Gough had been in the army for over 50 years. A veteran of the Peninsular War, he'd been appointed Commander-in-Chief India in 1843. Gough was accompanied in this campaign by the Governor-General of India, Sir Henry Hardinge. He too was a veteran of the Napoleonic War, where he'd lost his hand. Since then, Hardinge, who was also a general, had forged himself a political career, ending up as Secretary for War. He'd been Governor-General of India for just over 12 months. Now, technically, as Britain's top man in India, he was Gough's superior. But whilst both men were generals, Gough was actually more senior on the army list. He also had a lot more recent experience of fighting, even if his tactics hadn't moved on much since the Peninsular War, as you're going to hear about in a while. Thus Hardinge decided to defer to Gough in this war, taking the place of second in command. An interesting decision, which led to an embarrassing showdown, because when Gough marched to Ferozeshah on the 21st of December with the intention of launching an immediate attack, Hardinge stepped in. Or rather, he stepped out. That's out of his role as military number 2 and back into his role as political number 1. As Governor-General, he ordered Gough to wait for General Littler to join him with an additional 7,000 troops from Ferozepur, about 13 miles away. A furious Gough had to comply. When Littler's column arrived in the early afternoon, Gough's army was increased to 18,000 men. 1/3 were British regulars and 2/3 were Indian sepoys. With Hardinge reverting to his number 2 role, Gough, despite the late hour, once more decided to attack immediately. At 3:30 p.m, with the shadows already getting long on the ground, the battle started with a brief artillery duel, before Gough ordered his infantry to fix bayonets and attack the 100 entrenched Sikh guns. On the right, General Littler used the cover of vegetation to advance his men to within 300 metres of the Sikh defences. The 62nd Regiment of Foot, later the Wiltshire Regiment, leading his charge, were met by a ferocious bombardment from the Sikh guns. In less than 10 minutes, 17 of the regiment's 23 officers and a further 250 men had been felled. It was carnage. Elsewhere along the line, despite the withering fire, the British troops succeeded in reaching the Sikh fortifications. And all along that line, the British and Sikh armies engaged in desperate hand-to-hand fighting. Sikh swords against British bayonets. Whole Sikh crews died defending their guns. Sepoy Sitaram recalled, This was fighting indeed. I'd never seen anything like it before. As darkness fell, the fighting continued, illuminated by a Sikh magazine exploding. It was chaos. British attacks, Sikh counterattacks, regiments mixed up, men wandering around lost. Finally, at around midnight, the fatigue took its toll on both armies, and an uneasy standoff ensued. The night air was punctuated by the cries of the wounded, sporadic Sikh cannon fire, and a flurry of musket shots as opposing soldiers stumbled into each other. Gough's army was exhausted. Their ammunition was running low, they were hungry, and above all, they were thirsty. The Sikh army had made sure their enemy couldn't quench their thirst by lacing the wells with gunpowder and even dead corpses. Within the British army, a sense of pessimism filled the air. Hardinge himself thought they were finished. He sent orders to Mudki that all his government papers should be burned, should the British lose, as he expected, in the morning. The mood in the Sikh camp, however, couldn't have been more different. With plenty of both food and water, along with ammunition, the Khalsa were confident that in the morning they could finish the British. The British Raj in India hung in the balance. When dawn broke, Gough actually realised that he actually controlled a large part of the battlefield and had captured 71 guns. He rallied his men to renew their attack on the rest of the Sikh positions. And that attack meant only one thing. The Sikhs saw the early morning sun glittering off thousands of British bayonets. Here comes General Gough. On the right, Brigadier White's cavalry brigade, including the 3rd King's Own Light Dragoons, charged through a Sikh gun battery and a body of infantry behind it. Breaking into the main camp, they now clashed in fierce hand-to-hand fighting with hundreds of swordsmen. For 3 hours across Ferozeshah, the battle raged, as the British took positions only for the Sikhs to retake them, and then the British to take them back again. A particularly brutal battle took place in which several officers and men from the 80th Regiment of Foot, later the South Staffordshires, were killed trying to take a Sikh standard. Finally it was captured by Colour Sergeant Kirkland. And that standard now hangs in Lichfield Cathedral, the spiritual home of the regiment, which is now part of the Mercians. Eventually, at around midday, the Sikhs withdrew from their positions. Maybe they were influenced by Lal Singh, who once more had left the battlefield. The battered, exhausted British army formed up and cheered Gough and Hardinge as they rode by. But that sense of elation was short-lived. Suddenly, a new Sikh army numbering 10,000 men appeared. Commanded by Tej Singh, they had spent several weeks at Ferozeshah shadowing Littler's garrison. Now, just when it looked like the British had won, his fresh army could smash the exhausted British once and for all, along with their Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief. His soldiers were confident and keen to advance. But if they had paused to think, the Sikh soldiers might have had some reservations about their commander. Yesterday morning, General Littler had marched out of Ferozeshah unmolested and marched 13 miles to join Gough. It had taken Tej 24 hours to travel the same distance. Hardly the mark of a man desperate to fight the British. Despite their exhaustion and lack of ammunition, Gough formed his men up once more. Tej Singh's 40 guns quickly opened up, blasting bloody holes in the British ranks. At around 2:30 p.m, the Sikh cavalry rode forward to sweep the British from the field. And maybe from India too. As they trotted forward, Brigadier White ordered his cavalry division to spur their exhausted mounts into a countercharge. Stunned by the suddenness, bravery and ferocity of White's attack, the Sikh cavalry wheeled away. But there was no respite for Gough's army, as Tej Singh's guns opened up again. Now, you can say many things about Gough's over-reliance on bayonet charges against the best armed enemy the British ever faced in India. But one thing was never in doubt: the old general's personal courage. Dressed in his white battle coat, he now rode in front of his men in full view of the enemy guns. And they took the bait. The Sikh artillery switched from pummelling the British lines to trying to take out their commander. But whilst hitting a whole infantry regiment was reasonably easy for gunners of the Sikhs' calibre, hitting a lone horseman charging about in his white coat was a lot harder. and as their commander taunted the guns, his men were able to reform their lines and took heart from the courage from his own bravery. If today was going to be their last day, they all knew, British and Sepoy, that General Gough would go down fighting with them. It was now that two bizarre events took place that would affect the result of this battle. Assistant Adjutant General Captain Lumley, seemingly suffering from sunstroke and the stress of the battle, instructed the British Horse Artillery to ride the 13 miles to Ferozeshah to replenish their ammunition boxes. He then compounded this bizarre order by sending what remained of the cavalry to support them. General Gough was now facing a fresh Sikh army without any guns of his own or cavalry support. And for my sharp fans out there, are you sensing Lumley could be a rival to Sir Henry Simmerson? The Sikhs needed no encouragement. To loud drum beats, their infantry advanced for the final showdown. The result was inevitable. Or at least, so you might think, because what happened next is equally bonkers. As Gough rode in front of his men, telling them, strange enough, to trust to the bayonet, bugles suddenly sounded from behind the Sikh lines. Their message was loud, simple, and totally baffling. Cease fire. The bewildered British watched as the equally bewildered Sikh infantry smartly about-turned and marched off the battlefield behind Tej Singh, who had handed a victory to Gough. No wonder many ordinary Sikh soldiers saw him as a traitor, but Tej Singh was hardly going to admit to that. He needed an excuse to disguise his treachery, and he found one. His whole army had watched Lumley lead the British Horse Artillery and cavalry from the battlefield. Tej justified his command by explaining to his astonished officers that Lumley hadn't deserted the battlefield at all. He was moving to attack the Sikh army from the rear, so better to withdraw than be caught in a cunning British trap. And with that, the British, against all the odds, had ended up winning the Battle of Ferozeshah, and the Sikhs retreated back over the Sutlej River. As historian Ian Hernan wrote, the action of a madman and the response of a traitor had rescued a British army from a certain annihilation. It would be almost comical if it hadn't cost so many lives. 694 British and Sepoys dead, and just over 1,700 wounded, many of whom would subsequently die from their injuries. And Sikh losses, killed and wounded, are estimated to have been around 3,000. Governor-General Hardinge was appalled by the losses. He blamed Gough and his bayonet charges against the well-entrenched Sikh guns, remarking, "Another such victory and we're all undone." He urged his friend, the British Prime Minister Robert Peel, to replace Gough. But the problem for Hardinge and Prime Minister Peel was that General Hugh Gough, despite his lack of imagination, had won again. And it's really hard to justify sacking a winner. Having lost nearly 15% of his army, Gough was in no position to follow up by invading Punjab. Meanwhile, the Khalsa, despite 2 defeats in a matter of days and suspicions about their leaders, were by no means finished. The stage was set for 2 more epic battles between the Sikhs and the British. Join me next time as I tell the story of the Battle of Aliwal. But right now, why not watch another one of my videos about the British Empire in India? And you can support my channel by becoming a patron. There's a link in the description below. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.